Hello and welcome to our Tall Stack special, Rebirth at the River. I'm Rob Braun. The river has always been a source of life for our community, not just for Cincinnati, but for Covington and Newport as well. The three principal cities started at the river's edge. By the 20th century, we had cut ourselves off from the river with towering floodwalls and expanses of concrete interstates. Tall Stacks has played an important role in refocusing people's attention on the potential of the riverfront. Of all the events staged in 1988 as part of Cincinnati's bicentennial celebration, it was Tall Stacks that captured the popular imagination. Renewed again in 1992 and 95, Tall Stacks always invites participants to reflect on our history and dream about our future. Tonight, on the eve of Tall Stacks 99, we take this opportunity over the next hour to think about where we've been and dream about where we're going. The pageantry, the music, and the food of Tall Stacks will help draw nearly 1 million people from all over the world to the riverfront this week. But there's no doubt the real attraction is the 19 boats that will jostle for a place to tie up at the public landing. The Tall Stacks literally drip with nostalgia. It's important not to confuse the boats of Tall Stacks with the riverboats that made Cincinnati the fastest growing city in the United States from 1835 to 1855. Those boats are completely gone from our waterways. But the Cincinnati Historical Museum has recreated the essential characteristics of one. The Ohio River Packet is a story of American ingenuity. When the New Orleans steam passed the public landing on October 24, 1811, it announced a revolution in transportation and a revolution in human possibility. For the first time in history, it was theoretically possible for people and freight to go upstream as well as down.
As the country was so raw and undeveloped, and it was blanketed by a heavy forest, and the easiest and the best way to get around was just to go to the river.
Well, at least theoretically, when the river cooperated. But the river posed some challenges to the new boats.
To put it in a few words, it was up and down. You either had too much water or too little, and I don't know which was worse. I imagine too little.
That was definitely the view of the Steamboat people. They quickly realized that deep draft boats modeled on ocean-going vessels like the New Orleans just didn't work on the shallow inland rivers. Within a decade, potential turned into promise when the fertile mind of Captain Henry Shreve created the American packet boat.
And it was an ingenious part of American technology that's not been fully recognized yet. It would be a flat hull, set of boilers, set of engines, generally side wheels, possibly the stern wheel, one or the other. It's a Texas, a pilot house, and a set of smokestacks and various appurtenances such as chains, wires, and chicken coops. And kind of the strangest conglomeration of architecture you've ever seen.
You look at the size of a steamboat above the water and you think, good heavens, it must be underneath the water a great distance. But up here along the Ohio, 5 feet is normal. And, well, as one fellow said, why we build packets that could run on a heavy dew.
Once the formula was understood, boatyards sprang up all along the Ohio, Mississippi, and Missouri rivers. In Cincinnati by the 1850s, the industry stretched 3 miles eastward from the public landing through the town of Fulton, what we call the East End today. 10 boatyards with their ways, plus sawmills, foundries, and engine shops, employed 3,000 people. It wasn't just the design and technology of these boats that made the inland river packet special. They were also set apart by the way they operated. Each packet ran in a regularly scheduled trade. Some went long distances, from Pittsburgh to Cincinnati, for instance, but many more ran in small regional trades. One packet connected Petersburg, Kentucky, with Cincinnati, 22 miles upstream.
There was an evening boat both ways. There was a morning boat both ways, and there was a noon boat. So there was always something going on.
Even more importantly, packets carried not just passengers, but freight.
The freight was stored on the main deck downstairs, alongside the boilers, and back in what we call the deck room. And the passengers, or as we called them, the walking freight, lived upstairs.
Wealthy passengers could afford nice rooms on the upper decks. The men could smoke, chew, and spit while they debated the Kansas-Nebraska Act. Women could read and knit and discuss the affairs of the day from the view of people who were denied the vote. 3 times a day, everyone gathered in the cabin for meals. Meanwhile, poor people, including hundreds of thousands of immigrants, could only afford to be deck passengers. And what about passengers sharing their ride with coops of turkeys and chickens and geese?
Well, you could hear one of those coming about 2 miles off. And you can imagine there wasn't a screen on any window or door on that boat. And the flies were so plentiful that when you sat down to a meal, you learned by experience never to take the top piece of bread.
With competition, first from railroads and later from trucks and buses, packets struggled to survive after 1870. One of the last true packets, the Betsy Ann, was owned by Captain Fred Way, Jr., who worked the Pittsburgh to Cincinnati trade in the 1920s and early 30s. This grand gentleman of the river helped make history. In many senses, the last great moment for the Ohio River packet occurred here in Cincinnati in 1928. Steamboat racing was a grand river tradition in the 19th century, but after 1880...
It was a forgotten art until 1928, when every Tuesday evening the Betsy Ann left Cincinnati for Pittsburgh, 5 p.m. And coinciding with that, one of the Green Line boats pulled out of Cincinnati for Charleston, West Virginia, which meant we were leaving at the same time and going up the river. And more often than not, there'd be an impromptu race up there someplace. Nobody paying any attention to it except the crews on the boats, of course.
In one of those informal races, the Betsy Ann and the Tom Green collided.
It's easy to do because it develops a suck between the two boats when they're racing close together. And it's easy to get them whammed into each other.
A newspaperman who observed the private race reported the collision. It cost each pilot a 30-day suspension. But popular interest was so great, the Cincinnati Times-Star got Captain Tom Green and Captain Way to agree to meet each other on July 16, 1928, in a sanctioned race.
And I got down to Cincinnati, and I couldn't believe my eyes of all the people who had collected down there along the river to see these two boats go 7 miles an hour up the river. This was the days of Indianapolis, not that kind of business.
The race started with a cannon shot as the 2 old-time packets steamed under the old Central Bridge, belching huge clouds of smoke. 2 hours and 21 minutes later, the Tom Green won by a prow.
I never did win a race. We always came in second or last.
You can continue the tradition of steamboat racing revived by Captains Way and Green. Just head down to the banks of the Ohio this Saturday and Sunday afternoons. On Saturday, the race for the Grand Victoria Cup begins at 2:30, with racing continuing until 5:30. On Sunday afternoon at 3:30, the Delta Queen and the Belle of Louisville stoke up the engines and race for the coveted gold antlers, with other races immediately following. To watch the races from the shore, buy a general admission ticket for $15 per adult and $5 per child. To ride on board one of these steaming wonders, you'll need to buy a cruise ticket. Call Ticketmaster at 562-4949 or visit the box offices at either Music Hall or the Aeronaut Center.
After 1870, packets faced a new kind of competition from railroads. But in some cases, like the overnight Cincinnati to Louisville run, they hung on until the 1930s. But as Cammie Durking explains, the 19th century packet then evolved into 2 new kinds of boats.
Down one path emerged towboats. Unlike packets that were floating general stores hauling everything from chickens to nails, towboats concentrated on efficiently pushing barges of weighty bulk goods. Early tows were steam-powered and looked a lot like the old packets. But unlike the modern steel barges, the early barges were made of wood.
And they were more or less like egg crates. You just touch one of them and you had lost your whole barge of coal or whatever you might have.
After 1950, the early tows evolved into powerful diesel-driven craft focused on efficiently transporting bulk goods. Today, a single barge is capable of hauling 1,500 tons of coal or stone, 52,500 bushels of wheat or corn, or 453,600 gallons of petroleum products. As a point of comparison, to match what one barge carries, it takes 15 jumbo hopper train cars or 58 trucks. Talk about a help in reducing traffic on I-75.
Is this Greg? Yeah. Yeah, Greg, we got orders. Pick up a load if it's ready up here at Charlestown.
There is nothing old-fashioned about modern towboats.
Just getting email.
Day and night, these commercial giants work the Ohio practically unnoticed. Crew members work on the boats for 30 days and then get 30 days on shore at home. And just as in the 19th century, the river acts as a magnet for certain people.
But if you've cooked all your life, you know, I raised children and I worked in a restaurant as a short order cook, and then I raised a grandchild for a while, and I decided that, you know, I needed something that I could have for retirement, you know. So this sounded like a good idea, and I like the river. I like being on the river. It's always something to see and always something different. You know, you can pass the same spot today and tomorrow it'll be completely different.
With the high lift dams, running aground has all but disappeared as a problem. But towboat captains still face challenges. Steering a string of 15 barges into a lock can be dangerous. And steering a barge beneath a bridge connecting downtown Cincinnati to northern Kentucky can be nerve-wracking.
It's pretty exciting when the water is running, when the river's running. Fairly dangerous considering the size of tow you have. It's what we call hot. That's one of the hot spots.
Down the other evolutionary path from the packet emerged the excursion boat, designed specifically to carry passengers seeking fun and comfort.
You have to realize there's always an entertainment factor in every society. People go to the theater, they go to restaurants. And then during the summertime, they think, this city is so hot and so smoky. If I could just get away for an afternoon. And that's where the excursion boat comes from.
For Cincinnatians under 50, the Delta Queen is the preeminent excursion boat. Built in 1926, along with its twin, the Delta King, the Queen worked the Sacramento River. But in 1948, the Green family brought the Queen to the Ohio, and for the last half-century, it has delighted millions of passengers with calming trips up and down America's inland river. But for people over 50, the preeminent excursion boat most closely identified with Cincinnati is still the Island Queen. Actually, there were two Island Queens. The first worked from 1896 until 1922, the second from 1925 until 1947. Both carried people from the public landing to Coney Island.
People simply liked the boat ride. It was part of the experience of going to Coney Island. It was inexpensive. 25 cents was the usual fare, and that was round trip.
Jack White built a national reputation as a railroad historian during his long career at the Smithsonian.
When I was a kid, I wanted to stay on the boat. I didn't want to get off at Coney Island. But I think most kids hung over the rail watching the little boats that followed the Island Queen. And of course, the hope of every kid was that the boat would get upset.
And for adults, especially young adults,
they had moonlight cruises, and these were evening dance affairs, and the boat really wasn't going anywhere. And they had dancing. They had a huge ballroom, a two-story ballroom. They had some well-known bands and singers, and then you might drift up to the top deck, and they had big benches up there, and the couples would sit and, you know, smooch and talk and do whatever young people do.
This year, 19 excursion boats will take part in tall stacks every morning between 6 and 10 a.m. You're invited to explore 16 of those grand vessels. Your tickets, which include general admission to tall stacks, are available for $15 per adult and $5 per child. To purchase tickets, call Ticketmaster at 562-4949 or visit the box offices at either Music Hall or the Aronoff Center.
have an entirely different point of view about life from just regular everyday working people.
Perched high above the main deck, pilots were the lords of a very special realm. In the days before high-lift dams turned the river into a series of big, deep puddles, pilots had to stay in the channel, which shifted constantly. Chart books couldn't keep up with the appearance and disappearance of sandbars.
Mark Twain made a remark in one of his books that the word teach wasn't in a riverman's vocabulary, and that's true. They learned you the river.
Sandbars on which to run aground, lurking tree logs ready to rip a hull open, explosions, fires. Lots could go wrong, but
working on the river as a pilot is 90% being bored to death and 10% being scared to death.
Many of the captains and pilots guiding this year's 19 excursion boats at Tall Stacks look like what you might have imagined, weathered, colorful, and male. But an increasing number of women have worked their way between the sticks. Over a century ago, Mary Green forged a trail for these women captains.
She was so madly in love with her husband, Captain Gordon Green, and she was absolutely devoted to the idea of being with him, therefore getting her captain's license and pilot's license in a day when it just, you just didn't see female steamboat captains. She was the kind of person who everyone considered their mother. That's why they called her Ma Green. She was the kind of lady who could look right through everybody's baloney and see the real person, and she liked it, whoever you were, even if you were a scoundrel.
But even Ma Green couldn't have foreseen Joy Matheny, who worked 20 years as a pilot on excursion boats and towboats, before altering her course slightly and joining the Roman Catholic Sisters of St. Joseph.
If I don't return actually as a pilot, hopefully what I'll do is I'm in studies right now for clinical pastoral education to be a river chaplain and to start some type of river ministry to the inland mariner. There's lots of ministries to the foreign seamen that comes in from blue water, but for the brown water, Ohio, Mississippi River, we call it brown water. There's not too much ministry for our American inland mariner.
The Reverend James Wilkinson already ministers to Ohio River towboat workers and finds the task daunting.
On this part of the river, from Pittsburgh to Greenville, Mississippi, and some legs off of the river, part of the Cumberland as far as Nashville and so forth, that we had about 1,800 miles of river and it's about a half a mile wide, so it's and the whole congregation is moving. Their houses and they're on the move. They're not at the same address.
River music encompasses a wide and sometimes surprising range of sounds and themes. The earliest music to come down the Ohio on the flatboats came with early settlers who brought only a few meager possessions.
What I imagine they brought with them was fiddles. When the Irish settlers came to Cincinnati, and there was a whole busload of them too, they would have brought penny whistles. They would have brought probably little squeeze boxes, instruments without reeds. So I would imagine the music that originally came down on the river was raw. It was probably a lot of unaccompanied fiddle music. The one thing I think probably that was just as good in those days as now is singing.
1,000 miles along the river.
Whatever the instruments people had, the river itself always had an amazing power to inspire, something Katie has experienced personally.
I miss the muddy waters of the Ohio, gentle waves a-lapping round my shoes. That river seems to cover every single thing I know. Wade right out, wash away my blues. I was sad at the time, and I went down to the river every day. I had lost somebody dear, someone had died, and I would go down to the river and just stare at it. But the river covers everything. All your sorrow, all your joy, your whole life, your living, your culture, the river covers it all and keeps on moving. And so the river's a great mystery to me. and a great solace.
And don't think river music is only about beauty or adventure.
Well, there's a lot of murder songs about the river. Here's one. I asked my love to take a walk, just a walk, a little way. As we walked and as we talked of our coming wedding day, I held a knife against her breast, as into my arms she pressed. She cried, "Oh, Willie, don't murder me. I'm not prepared for eternity." Down beside where the waters flow, on the banks of the Ohio, so you could dump the bodies and make a clean getaway.
Most importantly, don't limit yourself to formal music.
It, to me, is so much more musical than a calliope. The sound of the waves, the sound of the currents and the water rushing by, the sound of the steam whistles, the steamboats, the barges, those are all music to me.
But there's another type of music down here on the river. Now, you may not consider it to be music, but make no mistake about it, it definitely is. It's produced by something you're no doubt familiar with. Perhaps you've driven across it hundreds or even thousands of times. It's the biggest musical instrument of all down here, the Roebling Suspension Bridge.
Been a part of the sound world that I lived in. It's always been a sound that I craved.
So Michael Barnhart comes to the bridge to listen.
I used to beg my mother to drive me across this, and as the tires went over the bridge, we would say, "Oh," with the bridge's note. Yeah, that one's perfect. You layer that up and you get a percussion ensemble. Dong, dong.
Michael Barnhart is a composer, and while most composers play the piano or the violin, Michael Barnhart plays the bridge. Barnhart is a doctoral student at UC's College Conservatory of Music. His specialty, electronic music.
Someone would be walking, metaphorically walking through a gallery of bridge sound snaps.
Barnhart takes those sound snaps, which he records on the bridge, and enters them in the computer.
You use it kind of like a painter would use a palette.
The end result, a 12-minute symphony of sound. A symphony entitled The Singing Bridge.
I think the sound is beautiful. I think it's marvelous, and I think anybody that heard it might then want to know more about the bridge that made it.
The bridge, the suspension bridge, has been part of Cincinnati for more than 130 years. And for most of that time, it's been called the Singing Bridge, for obvious reasons.
You're going to get.
And so Barnhart records whatever he hears or wants to hear.
Sometimes you actually manipulate the bridge, and then other times, I just try to find a good location.
No sound is too big. No sound is too small. No location too out of the way.
I come down here because the resonances are different. Like becoming a tour guide. I mean, obviously I have to spend a lot of time here, many, many hours, and then I'm just taking the most unique moments and putting them all together.
But it's not simply sound effects on tape. Like a skilled conductor, Barnhart molds and shapes his symphony. There's even a horn section.
So I'm taking the sound of the bridge and retuning it. So now you hear the horn is very high. If I go up 3 octaves, it's completely unrecognizable, but nonetheless, pretty interesting sound.
And that's what electronic music is really all about, making interesting sound. Of course, some of us may ask, is this really music? Well, to Michael Barnhart, simply asking that question also answers the question.
If you can stand on the bridge and ask yourself, is this music? That's enough. You know, each time I come down here, there's a new sound. At least one.
Down by the riverside, and it is a mess. In a sense, this is the front of our home in Cincinnati, our lawn, our entrance, our first impression for the visitor to our city. As it stands, and it's been standing this way for decades now.
That was the view of the Cincinnati riverfront presented in a 1962 Channel 12 documentary hosted by our news anchor at the time, George Palmer. Dreaming about the potential of the riverfront can be frustrating. It often seems that while politicians at City Hall and the county courthouse argue, progress on the riverfront seems to twiddle its thumbs. But when you consider what's happened down here since 1962, progress has been rather dramatic. And the plans are in place now for the next step, as Dan Hurley explains.
The riverfront has changed in chunks, and each of those chunks has its distinctive personality. In Yateman's Cove, the serpentine wall functions as a decorative flood wall, but also creates a series of amphitheaters for special events like tall stacks. Farther east, the Bicentennial Commission transformed Sawyer Point into Bicentennial Commons in 1988. With more active features than Yateman's Cove, the Commons encourages recreation. Although still a tangled scrub of trees and vines, the 22 acres east of the boathouse parking lot is already planned and funded to become International Friendship Park. But it's the central riverfront, the chunk right in front of the heart of the downtown, that's now on the line.
A place that rises from the banks of the Ohio and stands in dramatic contrast to the urban core to the north, that shines like a beacon to the east and the west, the north and the south. Imagine a new center for our region.
Because people come to these places because they love it, because they care about it, because they got some passion about it.
On September the 30th, a special commission headed by Jack Rouse released its plans for the riverfront under the title The Banks, which recognizes the bi-state nature of this opportunity.
One of the interesting things that I see that has been in and was out and is back in is covering these Fort Washington Way up here.
Oh, yeah.
How important is that?
Oh, it's crucial. It's crucial from the economic side, but it's also crucial in creating a real connection back to the central business district. It's crucial in making 3rd Street not the world's most expensive alley, but a legitimate address.
At the very center will be the soul of the emerging new riverfront, the National Underground Railroad Freedom Center. Will it be able to hold its own architecturally?
The building design is so exciting, so creative, so innovative that it definitely will hold its own. Between the design of the building and the design of the park, I think people will talk about the Freedom Center as being what I call the jewel on the waterfront.
The first thing we need is a big signature element. I mean, Paris has the Eiffel Tower, St. Louis has the Arch, Washington has the Washington Monument. What are we going to have? The world's biggest what? Well, we already got an Eiffel Tower at Kings Island, and the world doesn't need another arch, and there's only one Washington Monument. And then we realized that this wonderful edifice that, you know, many of us don't even fully realize exists because we've been cut off for so long. This is an architectural wonder, it's an engineering wonder, and Lord knows it's symbolic in terms of the bridges between the two regions, from slavery to freedom. It's perfect.
To frame that grand statement, the Park Board and the Recreation Commission have cooperated with the Rouse Commission to design a sweeping new park.
If we can figure, when you know it'd be on the bottom. Big parks mean big drawings.
The central feature is, in fact, an expansive great lawn that builds in some important features and functions. Because the Red Stadium will fill the wedge site, pinching off access to the river, the park plan requires building out into the river.
Without kicking this river out, our bank out, I don't know if it's going to be perceived as one monumental park, just another one of the 4 parks.
The potential is staggering.
If you take the whole site, the whole public riverfront, it's every bit as monumental as Grant Park.
And what will it mean for future Tall Stacks, the event that has done so much to reawaken our interest in the riverfront?
Right now, Tall Stacks can't go further west than the public landing. So the future Tall Stacks, we see the concept of the public landing extending much further west. We see areas that boats can tie up. We see a new wharf or kind of son of public landing on this side and a dock. All the tents, all the displays, possibly even the facade or more facades that shows what Cincinnati was like in the 19th century, that can all spread out into additional 50 acres of park.
So, great for Tall Stacks.
Absolutely.
The future importance of the banks of the riverfront lies in its ability to become a common ground, a place for everyone to gather. Come on down to Tall Stacks 99, explore the boats, think a bit about the past, but also think about the future and the role this piece of hallowed ground may play in it. Thanks for joining us, everybody. Good night.
I miss the muddy waters of the Ohio. Gentle waves are lapping at my shoes. That river seems to ruin every other place I choose. Wade right in, wash away my blues. I've been around, seen the sights, seen some towns. I get that longing to be homeward bound. That river runs inside my head like memories I can't lose, pulling me back to you and the Ohio River blues, pulling me back to you and the Ohio